Hello and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where you get to watch me watching the people who are watching the Pro Tour competitors, watching the people playing the modern challenges, who are watching the people who are watching me watching people who are playing the challenges. You get where I'm going with this. We are going to be taking a look at the modern, pioneer, and standard formats. We're going to take a look and see the challenges this weekend, which there was a couple of other events. There was a showcase qualifier as well as a standard super qualifier, which I believe are similar to like a 2-slot RCQ, I think, is the super qualifier on MTGO. So we're going to look at all those events. We're going to take a look at the metagames and see what the breakdown was in terms of most played decks and changes from week to week, and see if there's anything we can extrapolate from that in terms of what to expect for next week. And then at the very end of each segment, we take a look at all of the top 32s, and I try and find the spiciest deck lists that we can show off, because there's a lot of those this week. But before we get started, this video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com. Be sure to use promo code DOOM at checkout if you guys want to buy any singles, sealed sleeves, or deck boxes. Cool Stuff Inc. They got cool stuff, and they got it in stock. And with that out of the way, let us begin, as we always do, with the modern format. And with the regional championships fast approaching, I can't believe this, but they're next week. I'm leaving next Friday for Houston, and I had to check my flight itinerary just to double check that, because it feels like this year has just been flying by. And modern is, as I've been saying for it feels like the past couple of months now, in terms of diversity, it is certainly the most open format. There is probably about 15 different decks that you can play on any given weekend and expect to have a fighting chance at actually winning the tournament. The gameplay itself maybe leaves a little something to be desired, and I understand that. But in terms of if you're just looking for playing against a host of different decks, Modern definitely has that covered. And for the first time in what feels like ages, last week we saw Affinity actually take over Boros Energy as the most played deck. And this week, well, Boros is, I guess you could say, back on top, but it's kind of like tied for third. Affinity, Boros Energy, and Esper is right all around the same percentage points. Affinity down a little bit from last week, Boros slightly up. Eldrazi about the same. Esper up somewhat significantly, about almost 3%. Mono Blue Belcher down a little bit, which is surprising given how good of a matchup it has against Boros Energy. But I guess that kind of makes sense, because Belcher did win the Pro Tour, so the natural response is if a deck like Belcher wins a Pro Tour, everybody loads up on Ghost Quarters, Besajus, the White Orchid Phantoms, things like that. Amulet Titan, 5.5%, roughly about the same as last week. Probably the best deck in Modern. Don't at me in the comments. Neo Brand, 3.5%, down from 4.9%. As far as major changes, the only other one that I want to highlight here is it Prowess? Basically, I'm not going to say non-existent last week, but 2.1%, all the way up to 7.4%, which actually makes it the fifth most played deck, that's a pretty big increase. I was actually surprised when I was going through the challenges to see as much Is It Prowess as I did. And also, what I was very surprised with was when I was looking at the win rates from the Pro Tour. Is It Prowess actually had an extremely positive win rate against Boros, which was not my experience when I was playing Prowess before. So maybe they figured something out. But yeah, that is what the metagame looks like, and with that, let's go ahead and see if we can locate some spicy deck lists. The first one I have for you here from helping.deck. This was actually in the Modern Showcase Qualifier. This was a top 8 performance, and this is kind of what Dredge looks like these days. I believe this was initially a deck from, I think it was a Dredge player, Mafuz Van Gogh, and then Spike played it, and now it's kind of picking up steam a little bit. But the concept is you are ostensibly a Dredge deck, right? You have a lot of Dredge cards, Life from the Loam, Dredge 3, Stinkweed Amp, Dredge 5, Golgari Thug, Dredge 4. You have some draw, discard, and some ways to mill, like Otherworldly Gaze and Faithless Looting. But the new addition here is Artist Talent. And Artist Talent says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can discard a card if you do draw. Now, what's important about that is the discard is before the draw. So for example, if you cast a Faithless Looting and you trigger Artist Talent, you can actually discard your Dredger, then draw off the talent, and it's discard before draw. So you discard the Dredger, replace the draw with the Dredge, and now you get 5 extra looks before you resolve the looting. And it really allows you to just turbo mill your entire deck list, sometimes as early as turn 3. And from there, you mill over a bunch of Creeping Chills. You also mill over a bunch of Lava Darts. And what's cool about that is you can cast a Lava Dart for free from your graveyard, which will, you guessed it, trigger Artist Talent to continue milling. And then eventually you cast 3 Lava Darts, get back, 3 or 4 Phoenixes, combine that with 3 or 4 Creeping Chills, and that should be enough to close out the game. You get a little bit of chip damage from the Lava Darts as well. So really, sweet and innovative take on the Dredge deck, and this is definitely a deck that I'm probably going to have to keep an eye on and at least try for a couple of leagues leading up to the RC in Houston. Next up, from Alexander Rosedahl in 16th place. This was one of the challenges over the weekend, and the deck we haven't seen in quite some time. This is Titan Shift. Those of you who have been playing Modern for quite some time might recall that name. There have been various iterations on this deck in the past. I think not the most popular, but maybe the most tournament winning version of this deck was Teamer, with stuff like Cryptic Command and Remand, some other blue draw spells. I've seen versions of this play Stock Up and things like that. But this is a Naya version. So basically the concept is, and honestly, there's only one Primeval Titan, but really what's going on here is you essentially are trying to resolve Scapeshift and get a bunch of Mountains and Valakuts. That's kind of the big goal here, but you have a couple of different ways to kind of go about things. You can Green Sun Zenith for the one Primeval Titan, or you can tutor up something like Dryad of the Elysian Grove if you already have a Valakut, and sometimes you're just going to have enough lands to not even need to resolve a Scapeshift. If you have a Valakut and a couple fetch lands, the Dryad will essentially just kind of do that for you because it turns all of your lands into mountains. You can also fetch up an Icetill Explorer, very powerful with fetch lands, which this deck does have quite a few of, and more importantly, this allows you to play extra lands as well, so it kind of leans into that whole getting to 7 lands to eventually get to Scapeshift. There's an Ahirian here, which can go fetch Primeval Titan on the ultimate, which will presumably win the game on the spot. And then you got some interaction like Lightning Bolt, Reprieve. We have some other cards that we might want to tutor up with Zenith. There is 4 copies of Elvish Reclaimer to sort of not only find Valakut if you have Dryad, but you can also get some bullets like Bajukabog against graveyard decks. You can get Ghost Quarter if you already have the Icetill Explorer. And you can also tutor up Flagstones and then sacrifice those to the Reclaimer, find some more lands that way. Take a look at the sideboard here, just for posterity's sakes. There's a Boseiju in the sideboard that we can tutor up, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that is, I guess you could call this the new take on Titan Shift, and I gotta be honest with you, looks pretty good. Well, if we have a new take on Titan Shift, what if we had a new take on Boros Energy? David DeBridge here in 20th place. Again, you might recognize a lot of these cards if you've played with or against modern Boros Energy. Guide of Souls, Ocelot Bride, Ajani, Flage, Goblin Bombardment, Static Prison, Galvanic Discharge. I don't think I need to explain what those cards do. The important thing here is there is actually an infinite combo here with when you combine Safi Eriksdottir and Renegade Rallier. So Safi says, sacrifice Safi. When target creature is put into your graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield. Right? So what happens is you Safi target the Renegade Rallier. Then, if you have a sacrifice outlet for the Renegade Rallier, say Goblin Bombardment, you sacrifice the Renegade Rallier, right? Renegade Rallier comes back into play because it has this effect from Safi. When target creature is put into a graveyard, return it to the battlefield. So the Rallier from the Safi effect comes back. The Rallier, when it comes into play, will return Safi. And then you sack the Safi, target the Rallier, sack the Rallier to Bombardment, so on and so forth. There's some other interesting things. One thing I'll note here, so Ajani says whenever one or more other cats you control die, you can exile Ajani. Well, it turns out there's a 1-mana cat that can sacrifice itself to its own ability in the Spider-Man set, which is, I just find that hilarious that we have that set up as well. So a lot of cool stuff going on here. You can also do infinite life with Guide of Souls and things like that when you're going through those loops. Just a really, really cool looking deck list. And then Birthing Ritual to kind of tie it all together to find you the combo pieces. Birthing Ritual can also be a sack outlet if you need one for a Johnny to flip. Like, a lot of cool stuff going on here. So big shout out to David DeBridges for taking a new spin on Boros Energy. And since this appears to be the theme of today's episode, let us take a new spin on Eldrazi. Tron? No, there's no Tron here. Venerable Lamassu, 13th place. So you'll notice there are no Tron lands here, but we still have the Temples and the Ugin's Labyrinths. This deck is sort of, I guess you could call this Eldrazi combo, where you're kind of leaning in on Mystic Forge. Yes, I know, there's only one copy, but there are 4 cards, and as you'll notice, there is a Mystic Forge in the sideboard as well. So basically what you're trying to set up here is you're trying to put a Mystic Forge onto the battlefield and a Glaring Fleshraker. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, you get a spawn. Whenever a colorless creature enters, you deal a damage. And then you kind of chain a whole bunch of zeros, like Chalice of the Void, Mishra's Bauble, Mox Opal. You can chain some ones, and then eventually all those zeros are generating mana because they're all putting spawns into play. And then eventually you find a Kozilek's command on top of your deck, cast it for X equals 7. That'll deal 7 damage to your opponent. And presumably the Scry 7 will either find more zeros or a second Kozilek's command. And that's kind of a way to one-shot them. You have stuff like Devour to fix and find your combo pieces, Mox Opal to ramp. Emrakul is a good solid plan B and also a good pitch for lab. And then a Saga package as well, because we have room for all these one-ofs. So really interesting and slightly different take on the Eldrazi Tron, Eldrazi combo archetype, and gotta say, this one looks pretty good. And with Modern out of the way, let us go ahead and take a look at everybody's favorite competitive MTG format, Pioneer. Yes, I know, Pioneer is, given the recent announcements from WotC, the fact that Pioneer is going to be no longer in the competitive rotation, I think at some point we might try to phase Pioneer out of this episode. Speaking of which, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments section down below. Which, if there was a format that you could see potentially replacing Pioneer, what would you prefer that to be? Options could be something like Legacy or Pauper, maybe Vintage. Maybe we could do an arena-only format, although I don't know how I'm going to find data on that stuff because there's no challenges on MTGO. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts and where your general feelings are with Pioneer, because I'll be honest with you, I still play Pioneer from time to time, and I still have a lot of fun with it. It's just, there's not really any competitive outlet for it except the MTGO challenges. But with all of that said, let's look at this metagame. So, as you can see here, 6 challenges won by 6 different decks. That seems pretty good. As far as the metagame is concerned, Mono Red Mice, I don't really know what happened, but it went from 24%, which, by the way, the week before, or a couple weeks before, it was up to 33%. It's now down to 13.5%, not even the most played deck. That title goes to Rakdos Demons, who is up from 13.5 to 16.1. Boros Convoke kind of fell off a cliff. I don't really know what happened there. Is it Phoenix? Azorius Controlled. Azorius Controlled up a little significantly from last week, 6.8 to 11.5. Not really a ton of other changes. Mono Black down, Azorius Spirits down, Scapeshift up a little bit. But as far as Mono Red Mice, not nearly as prevalent as it was the past couple of weeks. Demons up a little bit, and Azorius Control. Everything else seems to be pretty stable. So even if we can't have a competitive outlet, at least the metagame looks pretty good, not gonna lie. And with all of that, not only does the metagame look good, there's also some really spicy deck lists to take a look at today. And we're gonna go ahead and kick things off with Medvedev in 4th place here. So Boros Colossus Hammer has been a deck that has been picking up in popularity over the past, I want to say couple of months or so, ever since the release of Cloud from Final Fantasy. That was really kind of the card that put it over the edge to be able to more consistently find your Colossus Hammers. So this deck list has mostly been the same for, again, a past couple of weeks or so. except for the release of Spider-Man, which brings us Giant Craft Helm. This is a 1-mana equipment. It says whenever a creature you control with mana value 5 or greater enters, you may attach equipment to it. Equipped creature gets +4/+4. Now, as you can tell, this deck list does not feature any creatures that have mana value 5 or greater. Really, the only thing this is doing is you want to equip this card for free, either with Kazul's Toe Collector, which can just do it for 0 mana activated ability, or Sigarda's Aid, which can allow you to cast your equipment as flash, and then it auto-attaches. So you're not really going to be triggering the Giant Craft Helm. This is simply just 1 mana +4/+4 if you have Toe Collector or Sigarda's Aid in play. Which, is that good? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it is powerful when you have trample elements like Shadow Spear, Double Strike with Kellen, and things of that nature, but time will tell on that. Also, trample off Cori-steel Cutter, so it does kind of work with that. But yeah, everything else pretty much the same. Just wanted to highlight that slightly new inclusion here to the Boros Hammer archetype. Next up here from DB Guide Twin, 18th place. This is Kavero. Now, we've seen Kavero show up a little bit in Standard. This is the 4/4 for 4 that effectively clones a creature in the graveyard. Now, the decks that people are playing in Standard have paired Kavero with Bringer of the Last Gift, Arden the Usurper, sometimes Craterhoof Behemoth, sometimes Valgavoth. I've seen Vaultborn Tyrant, so all these like really cards that you would associate with Reanimator. Very, very powerful cards once they hit the battlefield. What about a 7-mana 3/3? No? That do anything for you? So the really cool interaction here, and this is what we're essentially building around, and funny enough, both of these cards are legal in Standard, so just saying. So Threefold Thunder Hulk. I always want to say Tree Folk, because that's what you would associate it with. This card enters with 3 counters. Whenever this creature enters or attacks, make a number of 1/1s equal to its power, and then you can pay 2, sack an artifact, put a counter on this creature. So the important line of text here, well, there's 2. One of it is the first line, creature enters with 3 counters, and when this enters or attacks, make a number of tokens equal to its power, right? So when you Kavero to copy the Thunderhulk, it is entering the battlefield as a copy of Thunderhulk, which means it will still get 3 counters. But remember, Kavero says he's a 4/4 human hero. So he enters as a 4/4 with 3 counters. That means you pay 4 mana for a 7/7 creature and 7 1/1s. Pretty crazy. The rest of this deck is just some discard enablers like Champion of Wits, basically draw 2 discard, Winter Night Stories, Bitter Triumph, and then just some good interaction like Thoughtseize, Duress, Fatal Push, Thought Erasure, which is kind of cool. It's a discard spell that surveils, which means you can bin the Thunderfold, and 4 copies of Shieldred because this card is just in every black deck ever. So yeah, really interesting take on kind of, I guess I would say more of a mid-range version of Kavero. And again, it's got me thinking. I mean, both these cards are in Standard. I'm just saying. Next up here from Alberto SD in 16th place. So kind of sort of like a blue-black control deck where we're utilizing Narset Parter Veils kind of with there is one Days Undoing. Don't get jump scared by that one. But this is it's kind of like a weird hybrid where you have a bunch of good interaction like Cling to Dust, Fatal Push, Bitter Triumph, counter spells, Thoughtseize. You have some decent mid-range threats in the form of Unholy NX, Oil Deep Gearhulk, Shieldred, Skivix the Augmenter, which is 2/4 that you can draw cards, and then if it's in your graveyard, you can exile to put a counter on something, Graveyard Trespasser. But then we're also pairing this with the full 4 copies of Villainous Wrath, which is a 5-mana sweeper that also makes your opponent lose life equal to the number of creatures they control. So the combination of you get some chip damage in with stuff like Shieldred, you have Unholy NX to get some chip damage in, and then I guess the idea is once you've chipped them enough and they have some creatures in play, just slam the Villainous Wrath, deal them 5 or 6, and clean up the game that way. So very kind of a different take. I don't want to call this a control deck per se, because it's playing a lot of creatures, right? Like Riddler, Shieldred, Gearhulk, Skivix, Trespasser, and the Annexes. So I wouldn't say like a true traditional control deck, more of like Dimir mid-range I guess. We'll call it that. And last but not least, how could I forget the Goblins? Ruby Code in 29th place, which, full spoiler alert, 29th place, maybe not the best positioning, given the fact that these challenges are usually between 40 and 45 people, so 29th place, probably with a record of 2 and 4 after 6 rounds or something like that. So keep that in mind, take this with a grain of salt, but it's Goblins. It's Goblins. Just all Goblins and some Raise the Pasts, which Raise the Past really cool in this deck because you have Skirk Prospector to sacrifice all of your Goblins for a bunch of mana and then Raise the Past all of them back while getting triggers with Runveld Hordemaster. You're getting damage triggers off of Cacophony Scamp and Fireblade Charger and the Fuseling as well. So you get some really cool like OTK setups that involve just making a boatload of mana, getting all your stuff back, and it's Goblins. There's 3 mountains in the sideboard. I'm not really sure why. Don't ask me. Let me know in the comments why. What are these mountains doing here? I would love to hear your thoughts. So that is, it's Goblins. It's Goblins. And with Pioneer out of the way, let us get to everybody's favorite constructed format, which is Standard. Yay, Standard. I think I'm going to make a separate video on this, just kind of talking about the problems with Standard, because spoiler alert, I'm not sure if banning VV/Cauldron is going to be enough, but we'll get to that in a later video at some point. As you can see, the format is just 3 decks, which I guess that's more than it was a couple of weeks ago when Mono Red was almost 40%. 24% Mono Red, 24% Cauldron, 18% Dimir midrange. Everything else is just kind of here. Orzhov Pixie, 4-color control. There's the Sultai Kavero decks that are looking kind of cool. Simic Aggro had a decent weekend. It did take down the Super Qualifier. So if you're interested in Drunith and /Jackal, which by the way, I called that in my Spider-Man video. I said Jackal was going to be the best card in the set. And to be fair, it's a pretty bad set. So maybe that wasn't the most difficult call in the world. But yeah, not really a ton else to say as far as the metagame is concerned. But that doesn't mean that people are not trying to innovate. And innovation is Cute Chandra 19's middle name. Cute Innovation Chandra 19, something like that. So if you remember that username from, I want to say 2 months ago at this point, it was right around the release of Edge of Eternities, because Relic had come out at that point. Cute Chandra was playing this kind of 4-color repurposing Bay deck, and they're still playing it. So not a ton has changed here, although I will say there is a single copy of Phenomena Recorder, and it might not seem like, that significant. It's only a one of, but remember, you have 4 repurposing bays to tutor it, because repurposing bay can sacrifice an artifact token, like a treasure or a clue token or anything like that, to go find a 1-mana artifact. So it's probably going to come up more often than you would think. And this seems like a perfect home for it because you have so many good triggers to copy. You can copy a Detective Satchel when it enters, investigate twice to make, 2 more clue tokens. Gunship trigger to kill something else. Same thing with Perilous Snare. Extruder, you can make a second 3/3. You can get an additional 2 damage. There's just a lot of interesting things that you can copy with the Phenomena Recorder. But basically, the big concept here is you get weapons in play, you play a bunch of artifacts, then you repurposing bay up the Phantom Train, and then sacrifice all your munitions tokens. That's kind of the big concept here. So not a ton of new cards, just wanted to highlight that one Phenomena Recorder here from Cute Chandra 19. So you might remember a couple of, I want to say, what was it, a month and a half ago at this point, when all the Jeskai control players, they were consistently losing to stuff like Agatha Soul Cauldron and Proph's Eidetic Memory and all of these permanents that were very difficult to answer. And they said, you know what? I think we should just splash a 4th color. So Inevitable Defeat has been a card that the control decks have been playing for quite some time now as sort of a just lack of good answers. And that's kind of what Standard is really known for right now. It's just the removal spells are not very good. So having a 4-mana card that just literally kills anything is pretty important. So this user, Paka11 here in 20th place, has kind of leaned into that. There is 4 copies of Inevitable Betrayal. But we're not playing a control deck. This is more of like, I guess you could call this a traditional mid-range deck, where you have some aggressive 2-drops. Well, this one's not super aggressive because it dies when it attacks, but 4 copies of Sunset Saboteur alongside the 2 Voice of Victories give you some hyper-aggressive 2-drops, Tursa and Nova Hellkite here to kind of round out the 3-drops, and then kind of at the top of the curve, you have some Decadent Dragons. More importantly, you have enough dragons here to help enable Caustic Exhale, which is probably the best 1-mana removal spell in the format. It's just very few decks can take advantage of this because they don't play a lot of dragons. Some annexes, some other kill spells like Seam Rip, Betrayal, Helix, and Get Lost. Treacherous Greed, which is sack a creature that dealt damage this turn, draw 3, each opponent loses 3, and you gain 3. Very sweet card, especially with Voice of Victory, because the tokens are not likely to be blocked, and you can sacrifice the token in main phase 2 before the tokens die end phase. So some cool innovations here from Paka 11, this neat little Mardu mid-range deck, which, you know, Standard doesn't really have a true mid-range deck, so maybe Inevitable Defeat is the card that will allow us to do that. Again, I want to preface this by saying this is a 31st place list. This person went 1-5 in the challenge. I'm not trying to tell you that every single deck you see on these videos is a winner, but we have to highlight the spice, because if we weren't doing this, then I'd be showing you 4 VV Cauldron decks, and you probably don't want to see that. So, from A. Fitzsimmons in 31st place here, we have Rakdos, Monument to Endurance. So, the big kind of synergy here is you're pairing Monument to Endurance with Artist Talent, so every time you play a non-creature spell, discard, draw, and Quint's Insight, which says, beginning of your first main phase, discard, then draw. So, it has some other text too. When you play something from exile, you deal a damage. But you are mainly playing this for the discard to help enable Monument to Endurance. So now you have 8 good enchantments that both enable it. Then those are also enabling stuff like Marauding Mako and Inti. So every time you're discarding, you're getting paid off for more than just the monuments. And then some other good cards to discard, like Wekdu. I'm not sure if this is the best card that could be in this spot. Something like a Bloodghast maybe is more interesting to me. But in any case, we're playing Wekdu, and then a bunch of removal spells. Burst Lightning, Torch, Bitter Triumph, Lightning Strike, Shoot the Sheriff, which are all spells that trigger Artist Talent. Because if you're going to play Artist Talent, you need a high density of non-creature spells, which this deck certainly has. And then some Grab the Prizes as well, just for more discard, more ways to help find your synergy pieces. Because I'll be honest with you, this deck probably isn't doing that much without a Monument in play. But in any case, interesting looking deck list. I'm not sure if this is the exact way that I'd build it. I would kind of want some more cheap spells to pair with Monument. But in any case, very, a decent place to start with at least. And last, but certainly not least, we are going to take a look at this Orzhov mid-range deck from Predrag133, who actually lost in the finals of a challenge this past weekend. So not a 1-5 deck. And this is an Orzhov mid-range deck. Now, a lot of these cards you've probably seen in various decks before, but basically the combination of all of them together is what really drew me to this deck list. So first and foremost, you have Tragic Trajectory, which is a good removal spell, but it's kind of hard to enable. But if you play stuff like Novice Inspector, you make a clue off of the Inspector, the clue is an easy way to trigger Void for Tragic. So you have that kind of synergy there. We have Enduring Innocence and Cosmogran Zenith. So every time you double spell, you can make 1/1s off of the Zenith to trigger Innocence. That's pretty powerful. Elspeth, just a phenomenal card. Doesn't necessarily need to have much synergy with it. Just one of the best threats in the entire format. It's like so many decks have a hard time when this card is on the battlefield. But it's kind of just like black-white good cards. There's not a ton of synergy, I guess, per se. But just basically taking, I guess the way that I would look at it is you're taking the best parts of Pixie and the best parts of Dimir midrange, and you're kind of mushing them together into this weird amalgamation. But probably something worth trying, because this deck does look pretty clean. And yeah, if you're looking for something new, maybe give this one a try. And that, my friends, is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. I thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to let me know in the comments, what was your favorite deck from the Spice segment of today's video? Would love to hear that in the comment section down below. And until next time, adios.